which is 2 weeks from now. You have to answer all three questions. You type your answer. I'm going to show you some places in the book, particularly after the video is over, where you can find evidence for this. I'm going to actually be more specific about the chapters in the book. This is a 400-page book. One of the reasons for I have the test this way is because I want you to be able to understand this book. I know that for some of you this is a somewhat of a confusing book. I frankly think it's one of the most brilliant books that's ever written about not only Hitler himself, but the entire process of how you take over a government legally. This is how you do it. Okay? In the United States, you probably have to do things like infiltrate the National Guard and turn some people one way or the other. You'd have to infiltrate police forces. It would be nearly impossible in the United States to do what Hitler did. It would be almost impossible. Mainly because most people, or a lot of people in the United States, have guns and they're not in the mood to listen, and most of them don't want to listen to what people have to say. I mean, they fight with the government regardless. It doesn't even have to be some kind of a weird takeover. But I'm telling you right now, in the United States, this would be very difficult to do, although it could still happen. There's no doubt in my mind it can happen. And the Patriot Act is in place particularly to deal with things like that. And you saw in Greece, they're not going to negotiate with protesters. I'm surprised that if the Greek people keep protesting, even with the tradition that people have in Europe, they're going to start shooting people. There's no doubt about it. Because you shoot people, you quell the protest, and you get rid of some people who are just making problems. Most of them are probably on unemployment, and the government just sees them as dead weight. Okay? It sounds sick, but it happens. That's the way the governments view human beings. They don't view you as individuals. The Chinese government especially doesn't view people as individuals. You're just raw meat to put into their meat grinder to make hamburger out of. Okay? Not surprised you can find Soylent Green or something in Beijing. Anyway, look it up. Charlton Heston. Anyway, Soylent Green is people. Anyway, so all three questions, you must cite all outside sources used, meaning if it's not the book. Now remember, I gave you those articles on Merton and everything. You don't need to put a works cited page in for that. But if you use another book or other outside sources we did not use in class, under each one of the questions, put the citations there. Use MLA, you can use APA citations, parenthetical citations. What you want to do, for example, with Alan Bullock's book, put the parentheses, Bullock, comma, or semicolon, either way. I've seen it both ways, and then page number. Okay? For example, if you're talking about Hitler's idea of legality, that was all throughout chapters 5, 6, 7, and 8. Now, you don't have to use all those chapters, but you want to find some certain places. Now, again, I've read some of these chapters or pages already. Hopefully, most of you wrote this down. Again, though, after we get done with the video on the final solution, which is the culmination of the deviance that the Nazi Party and the German state under the control of Hitler was engaged in, as well as obviously its interrelation into World War II. World War II for Hitler was not just about taking land and about imposing his will on the European continent. It was also about expanding. Remember, we talked about that third element was expanding, externalizing, and extrapolating and onto other countries the concept of the final solution. There were only 500,000 Jewish people in Germany at the time. Most of them either immigrated or were thrown in concentration camps. Some of them actually became army officers during World War II. I'm not kidding you. And so, take example for Poland. Poland had about 3 to 4 million Jews in it. Same with the Soviet Union. A lot of Eastern Europe. Hitler also did not like the Slavs. You're going to see with the final solution, even though the anti-Semitism gets a lot of attention, there's a lot more going on. Hitler wanted to exterminate mentally and physically handicapped people. He had no problems also in mercy killings of older people who he saw as not contributing to the state of Germany. He had very little sensitivity towards anybody who wasn't a healthy adult that couldn't put a gun in their hands. And one of the things here about his economic miracle, as you read in some of the chapters for today and for last week, much of that was a mirage based on the buildup of the military forces in Germany. And most likely, had World War II not occurred by 1939 or 40 or 41, meaning the attack on Poland, the German economy most likely would have collapsed or at least had a setback. And at the very minimum, Hitler could have used the colonies that he conquered to feed the economic growth for a while, but the world's economy was very unhealthy at the time. The only thing that brought the United States out of the Great Depression was World War II. It was the only thing. I know a lot of people, especially people who love Roosevelt, and think that he would never try to take over the government or stay beyond his years in the White House or anything like that, right? He only ran for 4 terms. And that's why they had to make a constitutional amendment after he left office. Everybody else had respected what George Washington did, except for Roosevelt. And he explained it as, you need me. You need me. He had I wouldn't say he had a messiah complex the way Hitler did, but he certainly had a complex that only I, the great Franklin Roosevelt, can get the United States out of this madness. And only I can lead you in war. Okay? And on some levels, the people who ran against him were complete jokes. So on some levels, he's right. He was right that among the candidates, at least. But let's not be absurd. And that's why after the war was over in 1946, 1, the U.S. economy went into recession almost immediately, and 2, why all the military technology that was constructed and developed during World War II was then turned into consumer electronics. Television, for example, was invented by the military, essentially. So was the internet. It used to be called a rapid net. Okay? Radar, even things like radio, all these automated appliances that you know, all the things that go into those things were developed by the military. Microchips, computers, all of this stuff. The airplanes got better. All this stuff. So as much as we criticize war for the damage it does, a lot of the modern world and all of its technological devices like commercial air travel and helicopters and all kinds of stuff like that, if there wasn't a World War II, can't even explain to you how backwards this world would still be. There would probably be no penicillin and things like that. A lot of medicines wouldn't exist. A lot of painkillers wouldn't exist. A lot of medical techniques wouldn't exist. Think about a MASH hospital. What kind of... You don't have time to go get a medical book and look up how you chop a leg off or stop bleeding or deal with infections. You just got to deal with it. So anyway, believe it, to show you how primitive it was in World War I. World War I first aid kits contain a block of cocaine that big. And what's interesting is that some guy at an army and surplus store had a bunch of these things left over, and some guy went and bought one just to buy one. And he found out there was coke in it. And the next day he went back and bought all the rest of them.
There was also cyanide pills in those kits.
Yeah.
I mean,
the cocaine, by the way, was for a tropical anesthetic. It numbs things. Like Novocaine is related to, it's a chemical that's related to, it's a synthetic chemical. Or you said procaine. It's not exactly the same. But they're similar. Similar chemical compounds. It's not from cocaine, but when procaine came along, they stopped using it. It actually used to use cocaine for eye surgery, too. So, anyway, and Freud used to use it just because he was a degenerate. Whatever. I mean, the father of psychology injected cocaine like some kind of fiend on the street, you know? And he treated people with depression, and he was like, well, they feel great, and they come back every day. I bet they knock on your door at 2 o'clock in the morning, dude. Come on, man. Dude, I'll trade you my shoes for some more coke. Anyway. But again, make sure you know the difference between common knowledge and information needs to be cited. You know, for example, Hitler was the leader of Germany, probably doesn't need to be cited. The exact year he took office does. Okay? Maybe some of the details of his life. To say that his father was an alcoholic, maybe you need to cite, I mean, that would be a borderline thing. Saying his father beat him so badly that he had to be in the hospital for 9 days and he was in a coma needs to be cited. Okay? Or what his father's name was. You got that from somewhere. Okay. Anyway, so again, do the parentheses, bullet, page number. If it's one of these World War things, just put World at War. The first one we watched was New Germany. The first documentary we watched actually is called Hitler and Stalin, Twin Tyrants, I think that's what it's called. I'll send you the link for that. And then this one we're going to watch today is The Final Solution. This one is very graphic, so I do want to warn people who have sensitive stomachs or whatever. If you don't like seeing dead bodies and all kinds of stuff like that, I suggest the second part is the one that gets nasty. But this one is a nasty documentary. It's some game. This was made on purpose to make the Nazis look as bad as possible. I mean, there was, and I still find it strange and kind of, it doesn't really shock me with the way the army operates. they knew a lot of what was going on, and yet they didn't tell maybe a handful of troops on the Western Front, especially American troops, that, hey, when you get into Western Germany, this is what you're probably going to find. And so the troops were completely unprepared for what they saw, smelled, dealt with. Some of these people were this close to death, and were just, you've seen pictures of bone with skin overlaid on top of it. Nasty, nasty stuff. So, and again, Hitler killed about 10 to 12 million people in the death camps. 6 million of them were Jews. The other 6 weren't. They were gypsies, they were Slavs, they were political prisoners. He killed homosexuals. You know, I don't know if this is why some homosexual groups do this, but you know what symbol that Hitler used to put on gay people? A pink triangle. I'm not kidding. I don't know why. Maybe the pink is kind of the, you know, silly, girly stuff. And then, you know, if you were a Jew and a communist, you got the Star of David, and I think it was red or some other color that designated that. And if you're just a regular Jew, they put that on there. And I think we've talked about this before. Maybe not. If you're Orthodox and Jewish and you have a tattoo on your body, you're not allowed to be buried in sacred ground. Hitler used to tattoo their arms. Both, or at least the guards did. It wasn't Hitler personally. I could see down there. Wait a minute, I'm doing a tattoo. Be like, dude, shouldn't you be running this war? Maybe that's why you're getting your ass kicked. But you know, the guards would, for numbering purposes, but also to go, hey, now I ruined you. You know, and there are still survivors. There's a few of them every day that still have these. You'll see from some of the survivors in the video. One of them was like, he's speaking in Polish. He's sitting there going, look, I really don't want to talk about this, but I'm talking about this because I want to end the chapter of my life, and I owe it to the people who died around me to make sure that everybody knows what's going on. So you're going to get a good example, a good view. We went over the extreme elite deviance, correct? We went over that slideshow. You're going to get a good idea of what the real specific ramifications. I think one of the mistakes sociologists many times make, and something I try to avoid, is talking too much in abstractions. It's one thing to talk about extreme elite deviance is this concept. It's another thing to here's what it looks like. Whether by showing you Enron's behavior, or showing you Bernie Madoff's behavior, or in this case, more importantly here, and more devastatingly so and deadly, Hitler's ideas of race and class and nationality, and who's worthy to live and who's not. Each question should be at least 2.5 pages long. And again, you should use the book as well as some of the audio-visual material in the lectures. Remember we had the slideshows on the criminal deviance. And then remember, look over that anime one with the strain in anime. And then we had the one on the extreme elite deviance. I think there might have been one more. But there are also notes in the class, so make sure that you have them all.
It's all 3, or is it 2 out of 3?
No, all 3 of them. I may do 2 out of 3 on the final. I may give you an option to do either a different project or to, if I haven't decided on this, so don't take this as the word or whatever. Then I may make the final optional. Just depends. So I got a lot of things in this semester, and I know you guys do too. And also, since this is my last semester here, sort of as a reward for those who are doing well, one of the things I would allow people, if you got a B in the class and you want to up your grade, I have no problem with you doing the final. I will still make it an assignment. Having said that, if, and it's a big if, I decide to do that, every day though, we're going to have a quiz on the reading. Just a short one, maybe 2 questions or something like that. Okay? I don't think that's that bad. The final section we're going to do actually has to deal with a guy named Edgar Cayce, who was a psychic. He used to get into a sleeping sort of trance. He was actually more of a spiritual medium. He would channel what he called the Book of Life, or the Akashic Records, which is a record of everything that's ever been done and written down, and sort of on this, like in this book. And what he would do is, if someone was sick and the doctors couldn't figure out how to cure them, he did it, and he did this for himself. His voice went out, and he was a traveling salesman. And he'd get into this trance-like state, and he would talk in his weird voice and give the exact what was wrong with the person and how to cure it. Holistically, too. And very rarely did he ever suggest surgery. Okay, doctors? Okay, and again, I'll repeat. That is the nuclear weapon of medical activities. I mean, when you go to surgery, you have said there's nothing else we can do. In surgery, you can die from a simple knee surgery. You can get MRSA and drop dead. I'm telling you right now. Surgery is about as... That's why I laugh at these celebrities who go and get their face hacked up 25 times, like Joan Rivers. I think she has a standing appointment every week to get her face lifted. You know, I don't know how she blinks. Maybe she bought some new eyelids, too. The one thing with Joan Rivers is that she's a comedian, so she makes fun of it. Whereas some of these people, like Madonna, who you know has had... God knows what done to her face. Not to mention she supposedly has an enema every week. You know, they do that because of vanity. You know, you don't see Meryl Streep. Maybe because she's got talent. Okay, Madonna. Anyway, number one, did anybody see the Super Bowl show? It was like, part of me was going, oh, maybe in a weird way she could be attractive. Maybe her legs were made out of broomsticks or something. Anyway, using Hitler's life, examine the theories of criminal deviance we discussed in the lecture and the slideshow. So there what I'm asking you, and this one should be pretty straightforward. Which theories best fit Hitler's situation, not Nazism, but Hitler? And is it more of maybe a combination of factors? One of the theories of extreme elite deviance is that it's not just one of these things. It isn't just having a bad childhood. It isn't just growing up in a neighborhood where you learn the wrong lessons. It isn't just wanting too much for yourself and not being able to handle it, like strain theory. It isn't just sociopathic aspects of your personality or abuse, or it's all of those things combined. Very few, although Jeffrey Dahmer's parents claim, and parents of serial killers always claim that their child was normal. I don't know how you can make such a claim. But as you know, parents aren't exactly the most, don't necessarily pay attention to what their children are doing. I mean, Jim Jones was killing cats when he was younger, and his parents not only didn't know, but didn't care. Jeffrey Dahmer's parents claimed, though, that he had a normal childhood. Okay, that certainly lends theories to this idea that there's something psychobiologically wrong with some of these people, that there's a normal person who somebody does something wrong to them, maybe you just get mad, whereas Jim Jones or Charles Manson or Jeffrey Dahmer would want to kill him. And you can tell that Hitler was that way. When someone wronged him, it was over. You were on the list. Richard Nixon was the same, except for the difference was if he could kill people, he probably would have done it. But he would do everything, including break into people's offices and steal their psychological records and sabotage people and tap their phones and all kinds of stuff. He was very paranoid, and you see where this paranoia comes from as well. Part of it, and we didn't necessarily discuss this specifically, part of it comes from the insecurity of your life. Stalin and Hitler lived very insecure young lives, where they were brutalized not only by their parents, but by the church, remember? As well as they felt that they were abandoned by society. And when you live in that type of an environment where you're continually brutalized by multiple forces, you start to think that everybody's out to get you. And I'll tell you right now, especially for Stalin and Hitler, there were people out to get them. Okay, the communists were out to get Hitler. The Nazis were out to get Stalin. Stalin's own people were out to get him. I mean, there was reasons for that. The problem is, I think Stalin didn't realize that people were out to get him because he was out to get them. I mean, that's the sick cycle of paranoia, that you get so paranoid that you think people are after you, so you do stuff that eventually makes them come after you, right? Like if someone's real paranoid about doing drugs in their house, and they think the cops are watching them, they'll go to the police department and go, "I know you're watching me." They're like, "What are we watching, sir? You're watching me do drugs in my house. I know you got a camera." And they'll be like, "Oh, well, we don't know what you're talking about, but you can come with us behind the desk here and sit down and explain why you feel this way." So sometimes being paranoid can cause overreactions. And clearly, I think with Hitler, and that's not, that's an understatement, overreaction. Anyway, so use that slideshow there. You can also use the front part of the book there. There's a little biographical information there as well. Don't use Mein Kampf. Hitler lied about a lot of the aspects of his life and that. He acted like he was some poor peasant kid. And you saw, he was essentially on a pension from his father and then a trust fund from his mother until the age, until he went into the military. And even though he lived in bummy places, like a homeless person, if he would have just applied, part of the reason, obviously, remember we talked about how lazy he was. And if you saw from the chapters that we're supposed to read from like last week, when he got into office, did he enjoy being dictator? Did he enjoy the work of the office and reading laws and passing bills and passing decrees? No, he hated that crap. He had one main goal: putting his enemies in camps and eventually killing them, and preparing the nation for war so he could go after his external enemies. That was his main focus. He was obsessed. There's no doubt about it. He had elements of obsessive compulsive disorder. There was no doubt about it. Also, we're not going to meet. You know how we don't have class on Monday and they're switching Tuesday to Monday? I can't make it. I have a previous engagement, so we won't meet that day. What I'm going to do that day is give you the link to a documentary called Hi Hitler, H-I-G-H. And it talks about his health and his drug use. Okay? And after what I just described to you, now throw crystal meth and cocaine and a whole bunch of other crap into the mix.
What's going on with the schedule?
Next week, on Monday's President's Day, and in my institutions class, I always sort of make fun of this reality. It's like Alice in Wonderland or like The Matrix. They think they can turn Tuesdays into Mondays. So they're turning Tuesday into a Monday schedule. Because they started class on Wednesday, or Thursday, or whatever. No, they started class on Tuesday, right?
Yeah.
So that's why they did it.
This is like the first semester that they've done this.
No, they did this last
They
semester.
did this last semester?
Yes, they
I don't
did.
remember this.
Yeah, or a lot of them at least. Yeah, it's goofy. And what's worse is that I teach at 2 schools and their spring breaks are all goofed out. So like one week I get off of the entire school and the other one I don't. It used to be in Alaska they just gave spring break when the Iditarod was, but I think with global warming, even with Iditarod, there could be a bunch of wet dogs running around in mud is what it's going to be. So anyway, but also I think is our spring break in early March?
Yeah.
All right, I'll keep you guys abreast of that too. But keep in mind, Monday, Tuesday next week, we're not going to meet. But I'm going to send you the link to this documentary. Everybody clear on that? I'll remind you on Wednesday, and I'll send out another email as well. All right. So which best describes why Hitler committed acts of deviance, or is it a combination of elements of both? So that just clarifies that question. And then I'm asking you more specifically, what early social factors, like war, impacted Hitler's development as a young child? What else besides war impacted his development?
His failed attempts at art school and his self-esteem.
Right, that was very much a social psychological factor. And then one of the issues was the decline of the empire, or the Habsburg Empire, the Austrian-Hungarian Empire. It was falling apart, and Hitler, because Vienna was such a cosmopolitan city, and there were all these what he thought were degenerates there. And you remember, the book even says this, and I think this is curious, and I'd like to see some confirmation from other historical studies. When Hitler was about 12 and 13, 14, he was not as anti-Semitic as he became later on in life. So it is an important point about that certainly there was this, I think art academies back then had sort of a protocol. And if you didn't fit what someone looked like or what someone should be like, and you remember Hitler only did portrait or landscapes, and if you didn't fit right in, it was a problem, and it causes that. What happened after the war that really, and then again after the 1920s, what happened there that really, I think, impacted Hitler's development? What happened? So the Treaty of Versailles was a big one, the humiliation, the shame. And remember, he was in the hospital when the war stopped because he had mustard gas wounds all over his body. Anyway, and I'll tell you right now, those of you who have never studied World War I, and I mentioned this last time, you think that atrocities only belong to World War II? You have no idea the way the German, the French, the British, the Soviets, the U.S., the Italian, it was a horrendous war. And remember I told you that Hitler sort of grew up in this, along with his generation, like Himmler and Göring and all these, and Goebbels. They grew up in a world of war, where death and bodies and people's lives were presented as what? That they were valuable? Yeah, and I just find it hilarious, or not hilarious, but just strangely funny, like in a bad way, that when people talk about Hitler, they go, well, he was a demon. There was no reason for him to act like this. I frankly find me 3 or 4 reasons for him not to act like this. I mean, seriously, there's like 1,000 reasons for him to become like this. It's unfortunate. Okay? And here's the thing as well that drives a lot of people crazy with Hitler, and I somewhat agree with this. What if Hitler would have gotten to power and said, you know what? Now that I'm Führer of Germany, I've been filled with the spirit of humanitarianism. I'm going to use my power and charisma for good. Would the economy have turned around potentially? Maybe not. Would he have been able to convince the German people to come along with him though? Maybe not. And he might have been able to. You never know. Okay? We'll never know. And we'll never know if he ever woke up and said, you know what? This is wrong what I'm doing. He probably didn't. Okay? But one of the issues was, what was the atmosphere in Germany like in the teens and especially in the late 20s? Were the German people calm and rational and ready to listen to... What was the governmental system like? What was the democracy like? Was it stable? So all Hitler was surrounded with was instability, insecurity, shame, guilt. What else happened after the Treaty of Versailles to Germany's economy?
Was it inflated?
Yeah, and then what then occurred to people, then what happened after the hyperinflation? What usually happens after, what happened to Argentina during hyperinflation? Right, your entire economy goes bankrupt, essentially. Your government, people's savings aren't worth anything. People's wages go to nothing. Think about this. Think if bread tomorrow went to $500. That's what happened. And it was worse. In Germany, they had to have so much money. They probably ran out of trees or whatever. They supposedly make dollar bills out of some form of cloth. It's actually not paper, believe it or not. But people would take wheelbarrows full of Deutschmarks to the store to get bread. It was like 10,000 Deutschmarks for a loaf of bread. And people's wages weren't going up. But what's interesting then, though, the reparations got reconfigured, and France agreed to take smaller payments. And then what happened was similar to what happened in the United States in the 1920s. Germany fueled its growth in paying off the reparations by doing what? Which is what the U.S. economy did 4 years ago. Where'd they get the money to build their society back up? Because the 1920s was roaring in Germany too. That's why Hitler went up to the Berchtesgaden or whatever the hell and hid in the Alps. How did they fund? This is crucial. It was in the chapter. How did they fund their little run-up in the 1920s that eventually caused issues in 1929? Those of you who took economics, somebody else that hasn't talked yet. Okay? What was going on in the 1920s? How were people buying shares?
Wasn't it margin buying?
They were borrowing and it wasn't just 20%. They were borrowing 90%. What happens when you borrow 90% of the money to buy a stock and the stock drops by half? Now what do you owe? A crap load. I mean, you want to get technical. Hey, serious. This is what banks did. They did worse. They not only borrowed 90%, they didn't just borrow 90%. They borrowed 400%. They borrowed 4 times what they had, or sometimes 30 times what they had. Okay, and then sent that out to and let homeowners who had no income buy McMansions and live in them for 3 months and then throw the keys away. And there are people this day who have not paid their mortgage payment in 2 years who are still sitting in their house. And if I was them, I'd be like, hey, government, come and get me out. That's all I would say to you. You bailed out AIG? Either bail me out or I'm not going anywhere. I don't understand. I'll tell you right now, if everybody in America refused to leave their home, could the banks take them? I'll tell you what, you better not try and do that in New Orleans because you're going to get this stuck in your face. Like, I think we're going to renegotiate our mortgage right now. That's maybe why those people at AIG are carrying guns. Anyway, it's also because they know they're guilty. I don't think guns work in the afterlife, but whatever, they can try it. And so the depressions were a big deal. 2 depressions at the same time. Okay? And he was still pretty young at that time. He was only in his 30s when all this stuff was happening. I think they said he was born in 1907, so by... No, earlier than that. He was 50 in 1938. So that makes the 1880s actually. But he was still relatively young. I know that for some of you that 35 and 40 doesn't sound young, but I'm telling you right now. And I got news for a lot of you, and this may come to you as a shock. The president's almost 50 years old. Okay, he's not 28. I know he looks, people like to pretend, he likes to pretend he's 28. He likes to smoke cigarettes and play basketball like he's 28. Okay, he better take a little bit of a lesson from some people who've dropped dead recently about smoking cigarettes. Anyway, He doesn't do it in front of his kids, though, supposed to, or in front of the cameras. So how did it impact his personality? And then the last two parts here. Did Hitler suffer from narcissistic personality? Oh, that's the other one I put on the extreme elite deviance. I put those characteristics. We didn't have time to go over every little one of those. But the general idea is that narcissistic personality disorder is a serious psychological disorder that causes people to elevate themselves over other people, gives them a sense of entitlement, a dangerous sense of entitlement. Also, it leads to things like revenge fantasies. When you insult a narcissist, that's why I always tell people, don't get into arguments with people at bars or on the streets or on the road or at a mall, because, okay, 99 times out of 100, you're not going to meet a narcissist, although around here, it might not be the narcissist, it's just somebody who's tired of your crap and is not afraid to go to jail. There's a lot of people who either aren't afraid to go to jail or don't think about it. And I'll tell you right now, do you think every assault that occurs on Long Island gets prosecuted? Hell no. Okay? I mean, I would say less than half get prosecuted. Okay? You're more likely to prosecute some kid for spray painting somebody's Mercedes. Right? But I got cameras out there. And most people, when they get their ass kicked, they don't want to go telling the cops that. It's like, didn't you fight back? I mean, they're sitting there laughing at you. He's like, I'm going to kick your ass. You weakling. Like, didn't you kick him in the balls? I mean, if the cops are giving you, they'll be like, look, next time go like this, and then duck, and then hit, and then, counterattack, It's like, aren't you supposed to be stopping violence? Here, just take my nightstick and some pepper spray. Okay. Be like, all right. Anyway. So again, if you challenge a narcissist, they will come at you. And if they can't get you legally, they'll use violence. They have no problems with this. Okay, narcissists are crazy. They prefer just to crush you legally, though, with lawyers. Narcissists have like teams. That's why Donald Trump probably has 30 or 40 lawyers. He probably talks to them every day. He probably meets with them. Look. He's probably like, look, everybody keep your phones on because I'm probably going to sue 20 people. We're like, for what? I don't know. We'll wait and see. Okay, maybe somebody will look at me funny. Maybe a bird will crap on my car and I'll sue the people who let the birds live. I don't know. Okay? Donald Trump, he gets a parking ticket, probably sues the city. For friends. Okay? Instead of just paying the $50 fine. Which to him is like a nickel. Anyway. What personal experience helped intensify the feelings of anti-Semitism in Hitler? That's part of what Jeff was talking about there. But you can talk about, there was other things. His experience in Vienna, the rejection to the art school, the Treaty of Versailles, even though it was unfair, that was certainly blamed in German culture on Jewish people, and the Depressions were blamed on Jewish people as well. So his own personal experiences, and also remember, he really disliked the fact that he was Jewish, or that he potentially, his father was Jewish, and remember he bombed Braunau into the ground. I mean, and I want to say, didn't Stalin do something similar? He like wiped his records out or something. But there's a sickness in destroying your hometown. I would not do something like it. Sort of reminds me, even though it's not quite the same. If you guys remember Forrest Gump, when Jenny goes back to her home and she starts throwing rocks. But Hitler had no. Although, if you think about it, remember Jenny in Forrest Gump was abused. Her father was sexually abusing her. Wasn't that similar? I assure you, Hitler didn't have good feelings about Braunau. What do you think? I mean, I want you guys to think of this, because most of you have never even experienced this, or even know anybody experienced this. Imagine getting beaten until you're in a coma for 9 days. What that must do to you. And I'm not justifying his behavior, but again, and this is the dangers of alienation and isolating people and treating and abuse. Nobody ever probably in this man's life ever said these 3 words: I love you, or you're worth something. Your life is worth something. Or even, I like you. I'm sure almost everybody Hitler met thought he was a weirdo. And I'm sure he teed off on that quick. I'm sure Stalin felt the same way. Okay? And I find it interesting that both of them at one point tried to get into the church. Right? If you're trying to remove yourself from repression and things like that, I don't think moving towards the Protestant or Catholic Church is the way to get away from that. What do you think? Does the church have a good record on treating children well? And I don't mean the Catholic. It's not just the Catholic Church, trust me. Okay? Catholic Church just gets a lot of it because they got a big organization. Lenny Bruce at one point called it Howard Johnson, because they got branches all over the place and stuff like that. So, and one of their managers does something, they just ship them to Seattle. I mean, doesn't that, those of you who are Catholics, doesn't that bother you that the heads of your church, and it bothers me as a Protestant, since the Protestant church has done this too, that the heads of your church, instead of dealing with the problem, it reminds me of Penn State, that instead of even, they didn't even kick these people out of the church, they just shipped them off to Portland or Mexico so they could abuse more children, right? And supposedly the Pope's brother is implicated in some of this stuff. So, oh, by the way, and I mentioned this last time, and I know this, the Pope will tell you that this doesn't matter, but I will tell you, though, that to tell you that how strong the German Nazi state was, the Pope claims, and it's probably true, that he was forced into the Nazi youth, or the Hitler youth. He has a diploma with a swastika on it. Okay? Serious, and he's talked about his experience. He's German. His name's Wilhelm. Okay? I don't think we've had an Italian Pope for 160 years. So, anyway, the last one was Polish. All right, so any questions on that first question? Nobody? All right, let's start our, like I said, 2 and 3 we'll go over after because they have to deal with, this one I will go over in a lot of detail, because we did watch that New Germany video, and I did go over the notes here, but I want to go and show you where to get evidence from the book here. This one's pretty clear. That's the beginning of the book and some of the documentaries. This one is 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8. And even 9. But I will go over that in detail where you can get stuff from the book. Sorry. And the third one is about the final solution. Excuse me. And extreme elite deviance. We went over that a fair amount. Oh, was on TV because of the Super Bowl. Accurately noted that upward mobility from the bottom is the crux of the American dream. So now we're talking about this concept of the American dream. And the idea is, if you work hard and you obey the traditional American dream, or what you might want to call it the modern American dream, you work hard, you pay your taxes, you obey the law, you treat your family well, you have good friends, you hopefully work your way up from maybe floor supervisor to manager to executive, and then you run in a company. Like, you often hear this crap, they'll talk about, like, the head of McDonald's, and he started in the kitchen. No, he didn't. When he was 15, maybe. But he went to business school. Right? And he only started in the kitchen probably because his parents forced him to work. Some wealthy people who have more of a conscience than other wealthy people force their children to work. Hey, Hiltons, look into that. Because your children are out of control. Okay? Nikki's not so bad. Paris is an absolute disaster. And that, when people think about stuff like that, they look at stuff like that. That's a serious problem. And so people sell this idea that you can work hard. Nowadays, there's a new type of American dream where people think they can get on American Idol and be rich by the time they're 23 and retire. And I would say Exhibit A is Kelly Clarkson. Okay? I mean, she's not even close to the 10th largest star in the world. William Hung is one of the most famous people from American Idol, and he was one of the worst singers on that show. You can't name me an American Idol that's really that successful, besides Carrie Underwood. That's about it. I mean, where the hell is Fantasia at, and Jordan Sparks and all the rest of them? You know, so this nonsense that reality shows can make you famous, or like Jersey Shore. There is a thing. Those people were absolute nobodies, worse than nobodies, some people would say, because of what a terrible value system and personalities that they have. You know, I mean, what's the one guy say? Tanning, laundry, and what's the other one? The gym? Right, so he can have sex with strangers and catch all kinds of diseases and teach children about that's what happens, you know, when you're promiscuous and disgusting. And stuff like that. I mean, didn't they sort of almost have like orgies and threesomes and